I'm gonna record myself on my phone and I'll do plus start in the chat as well. Please do POIs in the chat. I will be looking. Please don't interrupt me using voice because it just kind of distracts me a little bit. But I'll be looking in chat for POIs. So without any further ado, let's plus start and begin. So this house affirms the motion that we want to send a text to our ex-partner to live with us because this house is really fucking horny and frankly a bit lonely right now. And before we get into that, I want to define a couple emotions, a couple of definitions: lifestyle and personality. Like, why did we ever leave them in the first place? Well, they were frankly like a little messy. We didn't really have the same ambitions and same goals. Our lives seemed to be diverging, and their personality got on our nerves just a little bit, especially towards the end of the relationship. And we want this debate to be centered around, like, at least in the discussion of lifestyle and personality, to not be overly major problems in a relationship that would mean that we could never get along, but also not too minor. We want these to be fair, equitable breakups rather than some kind of dramatic trauma or something, just so that both sides of this debate can actually have a functional conversation here. So, and regarding a framework for how we should analyze this debate, we are currently living in a COVID world. The world that we live in right now, we don't have a partner. And by texting our ex here and inviting them to live with us, we could potentially, but not guaranteedly, find a partner to live with us for the remainder or less of the duration of quarantine. That's kind of the situation on whether or not we affirm this motion or go against it, whether or not we invite them or not. We find this to be a fair framework that is equitable to both sides of the conversation. So let me get into why I just really want to send them a text. First of all, pride is for fools. Like, rejection stings, but rejection therapy is immensely helpful. And the worst thing that can happen by inviting them over to our place to stay for the remaining duration of quarantine and COVID is that they reject us. Or potentially, if things don't go as well as we would like in this quarantining together, we can always split up. Again, like, they are living somewhere right now, and they could potentially return there. It's not a tremendously harmful thing to give it another shot, to give this relationship one last go in a time where we're both likely experiencing extreme loneliness and extremely sexual depravity. We find that the worst thing that can happen is a short-term relationship or no relationship at all in the worst case scenario. Also, I don't know about all the other members of the house right now, but a lot of people have undergone a tremendous amount of personal growth throughout quarantine. Living alone or living at home with just your family again, being isolated from the outside world to a great extent, has fundamentally changed many people, their personality types, the way they engage in their lifestyle. People have picked up new hobbies, new goals, fundamentally changed their entire attitudes regarding pretty much everything. We don't know what their personality may be now, and the only situation where we can learn whether or not they've become compatible is at least sending them a text or calling them up and inviting them to stay at our house. Additionally, the serotonin and oxytocin receptors in the house's brain have been significantly deprived as a result of not being in a relationship or not having intimate physical contact for the last 6 or 7 months. Oxytocin is a hormone that is exerted in the brain. It's often called as the cuddle hormone, something that you get from feeling surrounded by someone you love. I mean, like, think about the world in which this relationship is able to blossom again. This house has recently rewatched all of Parks and Recreation and is halfway through The Office right now, but with our significant other, with our partner at our side, we would find greater happiness again by being with this person on an everyday basis, at least in a short term. I'll take the POI before the indicator since I can't. I'll take the second one. Closing.
Yeah, hi. So what guarantee do you have as an individual that you are most likely to understand someone by living with them, whereas compared to like texting them or calling them? Like, what's the difference?
Yeah, we think that you can gain a moderate amount of understanding of this person by FaceTiming them for a little bit or texting or calling, but a lot of the times you get to know somebody really well through the day-to-day interaction. And because we've established this motion to be where if you stay together for a month and things just aren't going well, you can always end this relationship again. So we think that you could get to know this person. Maybe they're the same, maybe they have changed. Well, only through the world of government where we actually send them the text and invite them over. And my final point that I want to get into before yielding the floor to the opposition is going to be the element of human need and intrinsic desire for sex for the vast majority of people. This House recognizes that some members may be asexual or aromantic, but given the premise of the argument that we were in a relationship previously, I'm not going to consider those cases at this moment. What I am considering is the fact that humans have an intrinsic need for sexual and a feeling of connectedness with other people. And many people are turning to apps like Tinder, like Bumble, to make these new connections. And given that there's already at least some history with this person, you could have an idea that this might be at least somewhat of a sustainable potential path to a future, rather than mindless, unfulfilling, and frankly vanilla and boring sex that you can get off of Tinder and Bumble. Regarding a COVID and public health perspective, we know for a fact that if you have sex with somebody, you're probably going to contract COVID. I mean, like, it's unless you're wearing masks like Dr. Fauci recommends, which or this house really probably isn't. This mindless sex that you would be having through Bumble or Tinder is not going to be in your interest of public health and not going to be or in your personal or public health. Having a consistent fuck buddy or significant other by texting this X is in the interest of everybody and your own personal self-esteem and self-fulfillment goals. For these reasons, I am so proud to be affirming this motion, and I will be texting my ex after this debate ends. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that speech as well. Now I'd like to welcome the leader up to open the up bench. Here.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Then I will just hop right in. Okay, so, oh, well, maybe my timer. Okay, there we go. Okay, so to get right into this, we would largely like to accept the framework presented by the opening government in the structure of this debate. We don't feel like this needs to be a debate about semantics too much. However, we would like to slightly challenge the grounds they presented. They have kind of modeled this round as a world where if they send the text and they break up at like any point after that, it doesn't really matter. We would like to establish that if there's no real longevity to the relationship, if there's no real true benefits from this that would outweigh the harms, then that inevitable breakup is just going to count as a reason to not text them to begin with and doesn't really fall on their side of the house because the text would never be sent. Other than that, we concede to the framework established by them. Now, to move more into our actual positive material, and then hopefully I'll try to have some interwoven rebuttal to kind of establish why their positive material doesn't outweigh ours as I go along. I'll have three contentions for you today. The first one is entitled Intimacy as a Foundation. The second one is entitled Compromised Intimacy. And the third is entitled simply The Pandemic, right? So for the first one, intimacy as a foundation. Healthy relationships of all types are founded on intimacy and like vulnerability to some degree. An ex-lover has a greater degree of access to you without actually maintaining that level of intimacy. What does that mean? That means they know things about you. They've had experiences in the past with you, but that does not necessarily directly translate to true maintained intimacy. It is actually more likely due to the fact that you broke up that it is not an intimate relationship at all. It's just a certain degree of closeness that you've established through time and through interaction. Because of this, like, excuse me, the previous relationship being established kind of shows exactly how you are incompatible, how exactly this isn't going to be something that's beneficial for you because you've already been together, you've already dated, you've already tested the waters and interacted with each other, and you've clearly demonstrated through that past relationship that your styles or your I guess, your requisite levels of intimacy in different categories were not satisfied by that individual, or they were frankly incompatible. And if that's the case, then that is going to be why you broke up. And that's going to be a strong point to why you're not actually going to be very intimate at this point in time either. And that's very important because as we said, all relationships kind of stem from some degree of intimacy, and that's romantic, that's sexual, that's friendships, platonic. All relationships stem from some sort of intimacy. And so we can recognize that if this relationship is not doing anything to satisfy that need for intimacy that is pointed out by the OG, then it's not really going to be doing anything for this person, and it's not actually going to be worth it as this house to send that text. Furthermore, I'll just move on to our next point, which is compromised intimacy, right? Intimacy requires some degree of vulnerability. Humans are social creatures, and we kind of innately seek out this degree of intimacy. This is something that was brought up by the OG, and we wholeheartedly agree. However, we feel like this point doesn't actually go for them. This is because, like, as individuals, we can attempt to be intimate with people who see us, and when we do that, we're more vulnerable with those people. However, a relationship that kind of lacks intimacy has a unique capacity to harm you, because if you are being more vulnerable with a person without that present or that requisite intimacy that would be required for it to be a healthy relationship, then you are opening yourselves up to all kinds of emotional harm that are going to counteract any short-term positives that are going to come from, the sexual release of interacting with a partner or a cuddle buddy for a night or two. This house recognizes, or this half of the bench recognizes, that moving in with someone is a very big decision and can impact your life in a multitude of different ways. And so it doesn't make sense to try to get some sort of short-term gratification, especially insofar as the government bench has identified other means of doing this, such as, Tinder, Bumble, whatever else. We can recognize that as this house is a rational actor, and this is trying to be like a rational decision-making process through this debate, that any steps that the house would take in accordance to trying to get the ex into their bed, into their house, and trusting them to be clean of COVID, those very same steps could be taken with anybody met on any of these other apps. And so really, the point of this relationship would not be short-term catharsis, because that is not denied to this house at the current moment. What is denied is more long-term, more sustainable intimacy, and we recognize that you don't have that with this individual, and that's part of why your previous relationship ended. Again, you definitely don't need this stress at this point in time now because of our third contention, the pandemic, right? The COVID-19 pandemic has increased instability for pretty much everybody who's actually influenced or affected by it. And people in unstable situations often seek to control what they can't necessarily control. They also seek to find emotional support for people as like a sufficient release or escape from the situation at hand. However, these two very factors are important because it means that someone could be more prone to making a more irrational decision and doing something that doesn't necessarily benefit them in the long term. People often are willing to make themselves vulnerable for that short-term release, but at the exact same time, that means you're opening the door for yourself to be emotionally abused, manipulated, and other such things. But we'd also like to establish that on this side of the house, we recognize that the consequences are not just emotional. As much as it would be nice for that to be the case, in this very real world we live in, full of capitalistic influences and all kinds of stuff, where people are still working in this pandemic, there are financial burdens to consider. We have to recognize OG pointed out the fact that this other individual likely has a house that they already reside in. Does this mean that they're going to stop paying for that abode? Does that mean they're paying for living in two houses? Does that mean they're not helping you with, finances and rent or mortgage or whatever else while they're living with you because they have to cover their old house? It opens up the door to so many possibilities for financial incompatibility and an increased burden. There's also the issue of compromised space. We recognize on our side of the house that it is very important for an individual to have space that they can call their own. And if an individual that they are not sufficiently intimate with is in that space, then they do not feel at home. They don't feel comfortable. We recognize on our side of the house that it doesn't necessarily make sense to kind of get this short-term catharsis insofar as the negative effects of having your space breached, of having your finances compromised, and opening yourself up to increased, emotional vulnerability with little to no chances of actually having that pay off, are strong reasons why you should be in favor of an opposition ballot. So, in summation, we just really don't think it is worth chasing a short-term catharsis for this. It doesn't make sense. There are other avenues to do that. And we believe this house should be a rational actor, should do what is most rational and what is going to harm them the least and also bring the most benefits. And insofar as, intimacy is fundamental to relationships, your previous incompatibility kind of indicates that you don't have much intimacy, and there's no reason to believe that you've changed in this pandemic to become closer. the fact that this person can provide some level of surface level intimacy with you without actually having to move in, and the fact that, you know, with this pandemic, increasing instability and other, you know, real world tangible factors making, increasing instability and changing these real world factors makes it not really worth it to pursue this relationship, and that's why we stand in favor of an opposition ballot.
Thank you very much for that speech. And now to close off the OG case, I'd like to welcome the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Can you hear me if I speak like this?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. I got the timer, by the way. On side opening government, we recognize that there is a fundamental disconnect in this time of COVID and quarantine. People's appetite for romance has remained the same or even greater, you know, because you spend more time on social media, you see other people who are romantically involved. However, the ability for you to meet other people who understand you and can also satisfy your physical urges has greatly decreased, right? Because you're unable to go outside, you can't go to work, you can't go to, you know, the various other places where you can meet possible romantic partners. So because of this, we think that it is the best choice for an individual living in quarantine to invite their ex-partner to live with them, who is somebody who knows about them, who understands them, and who has been intimately involved with them. In my speech today, I want to first of all go line by line through the opposition's first speech and rebut their arguments. I want to extend upon my partner's arguments, and I want to give a third argument, right? That sometimes this invitation can also come out of genuine care for an ex-partner. So, what does the opposition tell us? Well, they tell us three main things, right? First of all, they say that intimacy will not happen at all because you broke up with this person in the past. Therefore, even if you live with them, you will not be intimately involved. Second of all, they say that, you know, the point of this kind of relationship should not be short-term catharsis because you can achieve that through other means. And finally, they talk about financial burdens on the person sending out the invitation. Why do we think all these things are flawed? First of all, on the idea that intimacy won't happen, we think that this is simply a ridiculous claim. You know, yes, theoretically, based on their analysis, you know, maybe the fact that you broke up shows that you were incompatible. But, you know, let's think about it. You know, in the real world, right? We're all college students here. We know that, you know, if you invite your ex-partner to live with you during quarantine, intimate kind of relationships will definitely happen, right? And my partner has shown you why that is very important, right? Because having a lack of intimacy means that you are deprived of these hormones that make your life more fulfilled and more satisfying. Second of all, they talk to you about how the point of relationship isn't short-term catharsis, right? But the very problem with quarantine that we see is that people are unable to achieve this short-term catharsis in other ways, right? You go on Tinder or Bumble and it's very difficult for you to connect with somebody, especially since quarantine comes with other risks, right? Such as COVID, you know, you're unable to leave your apartment, all of these things. So the short-term catharsis is much more easily fulfilled by an ex-partner. But second of all, we also point to the fact that there are other long-term benefits to this as well that they did not rebut or respond to, right? My partner talked about how people have changed in quarantine and that there's the possibility of patching up long-term relationships. These are all very, very important things that only come from inviting your ex-partner and not from a random person that you find on a dating app. Now, third of all, they talk about stability, right? That people are prone to irrational decisions and that there are consequences to this, and including financial consequences and financial burdens. We don't really see how this is a very important part of the debate, right? First of all, you know, when you're inviting your ex-partner, if your ex-partner decides to move in with you, that necessarily implies that you have already agreed on a very working model of how that cohabitation will work, right? So we're kind of assuming that on the government side. But, you know, secondly, we think that like an invitation in and of itself is not very impactful, right? You have nothing left to lose really when you're living by yourself in quarantine. So, if it doesn't work out, that's fine. At least the possibility of it working out means that you should invite your ex-partner to live with you. So what did my first speaker talk about? He basically talked about two different levels of impacts, right? First of all, in the short term, people are deprived of sexual relations, which are very important. People are also very lonely and bored, oftentimes resulting in very serious kind of psychological conditions, right? Many people are more depressed living by themselves in quarantine, right? So for that reason, short-term satisfaction of having a person who knows you intimately and wants and knows about you and understands you and that you can live with and talk to, that in and of itself is a very, very, very strong motivator. Second of all, like I've said, people also have a greater appetite for romance, right? Especially since you're on social media more often, you see other people around you involved in romantic relations. That means you're even more willing to pursue romantic relationships than you might have been under the status quo. So that means that short-term wise, it is very, very important and motivating for you to invite your ex. Moreover, on the long term, this helps patch up relations. But before that, does either side have any POIs?
Yeah,
Nope.
so we already test for like things like STDs and the status quo when we're having sex, right? Why can't we assume that people can get like say a COVID test before they hook up with someone they met on Tinder?
Okay, that might be true, but you have to understand and acknowledge and admit that under quarantine, it is far less likely for you to meet as many new people as you would have under the status quo, right? It's very, very unlikely because people are literally confined to their homes. So an ex-partner is definitely more effective. Now, on the long term, he talked to you about how it might patch up relations because people have changed, right? And also, there is a genuine care that you might have for your ex-partner that justifies this invitation, right? In times of COVID, because people are lonely, because they might be suffering from, some psychological issues, because, people have an enhanced awareness of their own mortality and they're scared of losing the people that they love, right? COVID has reminded us of this, and for that reason, you might be genuinely interested in reaching out to your ex-partner and establishing relations with them and seeing how they're doing and seeing if you two can rekindle a long-term romantic relation that you used to have. And finally, even if it doesn't work out, there are still opportunities for personal growth as well, right? You're living with someone who might be incompatible with you. You have to understand how to deal with these people. It will make you more able to pursue similar romantic relations in the future without them not working out. For all of these reasons, very, very proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you very much as well. And now to close off the opening half, I'd like to welcome the DLO. Here.
Okay, give me 1 sec. I'll start the timer. Okay, and here we go. Right then. So I think that there is a major mistake that's happening in this round so far, and that is that the government bench is attempting to take a bit too much ground, i.e. they're putting forth this idea that, sending the invitation is completely inconsequential, while it's also somehow completely imperative to this house's life. Now, here's the issue here. For the sake of the debate, we can't just sit here and say, even if this idea goes wrong, then it doesn't matter. Because for being a rational actor, as my partner pointed out, we have to make sure that this house is a rational actor. By being a rational actor, we are saying that we need to think about the consequences, and the consequences may actually matter, which is why we brought up things along the lines of emotional intimacy and things like our economic standing. Now, here's something. They talked about this idea of, we know for a fact intimacy will occur. But here's the thing. We believe that view of intimacy is, one, heteronormative, and two, extremely reductive, i.e. the intimacy that they're talking about is just sex. They're just saying, yes, your ex will come here, you'll have sex with them, and then everything will be fine. However, one, we believe that that doesn't encompass how people who are not, some people who aren't straight experience intimacy in the first place, and two, does not at all account for emotional intimacy. I.e., sure, maybe we can have sex. That doesn't mean I'll be emotionally fulfilled by being with this person who I've already had a failed relationship with. Finally, before I get back into reiterating our case, they said that we they said that we brought up the they brought up our idea that short-term catharsis is not what we should be aiming for, right? And they just disagree with this point, seeing as they think that there are long-term benefits for the fact that, quote-unquote, people have changed. However, they've changed while we haven't been talking to each other. What's the sudden guarantee that all of a sudden this person is able to, fit with my lifestyle, fit with my personality, since, they've changed in the months that I haven't seen them? What's to say they haven't changed in the absolute opposite direction and become even more unbearable for me to be with? Now, let's get back into reiterating the opposition case. So, first, my partner brought to you this idea of intimacy. Now, obviously, what was meant by this was emotional intimacy, i.e., healthy relationships being founded off vulnerability and intimacy. However, the government bench chose to completely ignore this idea of emotional intimacy and just talked about sex, because that, for some reason, is all they're concerned with. My partner brought up the idea that your ex-partner has this idea of knowledge of you. They know who you are. You're inherently vulnerable with them, but you don't have an intimacy with them yet. Meaning that when they come into your place of dwelling, there's every chance that they may end up emotionally hurting you, whether that's on purpose or otherwise. Second off, this idea of compromised intimacy, once again, based on the idea of your partner being able to hurt you. Intimacy inherently requires you to be vulnerable to the person you're attempting to be intimate with. And you giving out that vulnerability as soon as they come into your house opens you up to harms. We believe that the government bench just does not address this, i.e. things like your partner saying things that are harmful, your partner not exactly meshing with your personality, or like disregarding your lifestyle, or even you once again breaking up with this partner, seeing as that could very well be extremely emotionally draining for you, especially when we face the issues that we mentioned in our third pandemic, the increased instability that you're already experiencing in your life, i.e. you may be working, you may not be working, and things along those lines. But you already know that you're having to come to some new economic agreement with this ex-partner, i.e. while you're coming to this agreement, trying to find some new form of stability, you now running the risk of your partner breaking up with you and all of that falling apart. Let's also keep in mind that statistically, individuals who live with each other prior to marriage have a higher rate of divorce. This means that not only are you accepting the risk of being broken up with by inviting them there, you're also increasing the likelihood that you will not have a long-lasting relationship, which once again falls into this issue of short-term catharsis. All you possibly can get from this relationship is short-term catharsis from things along the lines of sex and otherwise. However, that short-term catharsis can be found in other ways, i.e. you can actually start texting someone, start messaging someone, and build an actual emotional bond with them, an actual intimate bond with them, instead of just clawing for someone who has already broken your heart once, and build something that could possibly be long-term. I'll take Alexander's POI.
We told you that people are, social animals, and that in quarantine they're bored and lonely, which deprives them of emotional fulfillment, right? So it's not only short-term catharsis, it's also the fact that you have somebody there who knows and understands you.
Right, and they knew and understood you before you all broke up. And them knowing and understanding you didn't save your relationship, so why would it make things work now? You're just trying to restart something that ended with problems and without actually solving any of the problems that existed beforehand. And we believe that this, once again, will not create any long-term solvency, will not solve any long-term problems for this house. So just running through refutation of their case again, they brought up this idea of pride being for fools and that rejection is the worst thing that can happen. However, clearly, as we've pointed out through my partner's speech and through my reiteration of our case, that is most definitely not the worst thing that can happen. You can become heartbroken again. Furthermore, emotions are not the only things that can be harmed. You can have your financial situation thrown out of whack for the fact that you thought this person would be living with you, and all of a sudden things just did not work out. Finally, this in the first place, sending this text, inviting them to your home could be completely futile for the fact that you send them this text, you invite them here, and then all of a sudden you realize that, right, things didn't work out for a reason, and they just won't work out again. They constantly bring up this idea that people have an appetite for romance and things along those lines, except like what you will be getting here isn't a proper romantic connection. What you'll be getting here is an attempt at shallow intimacy through sex. And for these reasons, we proudly stand for an opposition ballot.
Thank you very much for that speech. Now, to open the closing half of this debate, I'd like to welcome the member of government. Here.
Am I audible?
Yep.
All right, I'll start myself. And so the motion in this debate is the House would invite, quote unquote, to live with you during quarantine. Our case revolves around the fact that the motion doesn't specify the nature of the relationship that will occur after you're invited and the ability of two adults to discuss what kind of relationship they will have, which seems fair enough to assume in this narrative. Now, in the motion, it clearly implies that we invite the ex-partner to live with you, and it didn't imply what kind of relationship we will have. Dating and living together are widely different. Things that can stress either is different from one another. Just because you had differences that forced you to end a relationship does not mean that these differences and these stressors will transfer into living with someone. This is also because one of the differences is expectation, which is very important here to understand that between partners in a relationship, expectations is different than between roommates or between people who are living together. Things like jealousy are very existent between friends or even friends with benefits, to that matter. This is very clearly different from being in a relationship. Now, there are two scenarios here that kind of went on and on in the opening half, which is the rejection from actually being texted and what if they accepted it. So I will discuss this in a timeline of what are the possibilities that will happen and how each one will end. Now, first of all, there is a chance that they will reject actually coming here because there's nothing in the motion that implies that they will accept this. Now, we would think this is very unlikely because, first of all, they are also lonely, assuming they don't have a partner, which would make it absurd to ask them in the first place. Second of all, we already have been texting again, and this implies there's some kind of mutual liking, wink, wink, and it's a rent-free living, so it's all positives. The second scenario, which is more likely, is that they will accept coming to live with us. Understanding this on both parties, this is just a living situation. It gives you many options that we could decide on, being two adults, partners that are actually able to be in an intellectual discussion about the future of our interactions. This is very fair to assume on both sides of the debate. We have many options. First of all, you will be living buddies. Nothing sexual, nothing romantic. This is an option. We can agree that we don't want to have any kind of romantic or sexual interactions. Now, what's the benefits of this? First of all, you really know each other. You've dated before, getting emotional and sexual throughout that dating. You both know how to have fun together and without having to be sexual or romance because you probably didn't sleep together on the first date and you didn't say I love you till like the 10th date. So this is very helpful in the lockdown situation where loneliness is killing and prolonged lockdowns of cafes, bars, there's no social activities, will force a great stress on you. And having this kind of friend here, living with you, having fun with you, will make it way less lonelier. And this is reflecting the impacts mentioned before of having someone to make it less lonelier. Now, the second option is being friends with benefits, with agreeing that there's going to be no relationship and no commitment, nothing romantic. If both of you agree that there's going to be sexual stuff without it having to be committed relationship or romance, understanding again that you're both intelligent adults, the average American bottle of water of adults, that would be great because not only you'll get the company of someone you can actually have fun with as a friend, but also could blow off some steam and get all the benefits mentioned on the opening half of this of government of sex and oxytocin and all that biology stuff. Third of all, this will actually give a relationship another shot, which is also a possibility, but we don't take it as granted as the opening half does. This is very important because there's a chance, and I'll explain why there's going to be a chance that this is going to work here. Well, the OG explained how personal growth under the pandemic, which is very valid here, but we think there's a more, let's say, consistent variable that has changed between the two situations and the two relationship trials, which is the different conditions under the pandemic for everyone, because there's going to be lockdowns, they're going to be closing the bars, there's going to be a huge difference in the kind of lifestyle you can live. And reflecting to the Infoslides, the differences were in personality and lifestyle. And the reason this ended is due to the incompatibilities, as I mentioned. But everything has changed. For example, which is a very valid example to assume here, I as the actor was an introvert and my ex was an extrovert, which is very large personality difference and could have a huge stress on the kind of relationship we're talking about. This would easily lead to a breakup in the pre-pandemic world. While in the pandemic situation, everyone is inside, everyone is locked down. I'm not telling my girlfriend we can't go out. The government is telling my girlfriend not to go out. So this would take away this stressor and change the circumstances that would actually remove the kind of things that cause us to break up in the first time, which is very valid to assume here, because if it's simply being possible and from the amount of difference of lifestyle we have from pre and post pandemic. Now, for this example, we take that the circumstances has changed and the circumstances that will lead to the breakup that enforce the tension on the relationship will change. And the government team believes that we first of all, we grow, and also the incompatibilities affected by the general condition of the country has also changed. The opposition will say that the change will be connected to the COVID-19 situation. Well, yeah, that's a risk. There is always a risk in any relationship of a breakup and of broken heart. No one on any side of the house could, let's say, remove this risk all along. But we actually living together and with different conditions, with experiencing more of this partner without the stressors that on the relationship would give us more insight into our partners. And there is a big opportunity here that we will see things that we didn't see before because of the things that were actually binding us, and seeing things in this partner that are actually worth holding on to, for despite things that are going back after the pandemic and these stressors coming back. So we were able to get insight into our partners that we were never able to get to because of the first of all the possibility of growth mentioned in the opening government and the nuanced discussion of the general conditions that has changed. But thinking, taking our case, taking the opposition case at its best, what will end by a breakup after a pandemic, we believe it's still worth it. Why? Yeah, there's a breakup, that sucks, but we have to compare in two worlds: you being lonely under the pandemic lockdown and you being heartbroken after the pandemic. And we think in this situation, understanding the kind of stress of the pandemic and the lockdown is inflicting on people losing their jobs, people are getting poorer, people are having financial incomes. My friend had to shut down his company because of the lockdown. There's a huge amount of stressors. Now, after the pandemic, if it didn't work out, okay, they're gonna break up. We agree that there's a possibility of that, but the situation will be way different. The economical stresses will be less. They will be able to have way more distractions between them that will actually help them move on from that kind of breakup. And the amount of stress they are already suffering under the condition here in the lockdown is unbearable, that we think it's more impactful for us to text our ex, and I will personally text all of my exes. For that, we would like to propose. Thank you.
Thank you very much as well. To open the CO case, I'd like to welcome the member of UP, here.
Fantastic. Am I audible?
Loud and clear.
Brilliant. Just a quick note to everybody competing. I'm not going to have Discord open when I'm speaking, so please just call out POIs. I don't take it as an interruption. Should be okay. Cool. Starting in 3, 2, 1. I think opening and closing government and our own opening opposition fell into the pretty obvious trap of getting caught in a wash about what the relationship looks like. I think OO did enough to convince you that it would end poorly, but we're going to sidestep that entire clash and tell you that even in government's best case, where this relationship is fully optimal, you end up worse off as an individual. 4 points of rebuttal I'm going to give you before I delve into the extension. First, this idea that COVID is going to magically change the behavior of your partner that both OG and CG talk about. First of all, we don't believe that COVID necessitates a change, right? There's no evidence that this person is actually going to change for the better. If someone treats you horribly under normal or fine circumstances where everything is optimal, it isn't going to get better under unusual or worse circumstances, especially given their lack of social relationships right now. They're incredibly likely to manipulate you because they also want someone to fuck and to see for that oxytocin that opening government values so highly. Next, this idea that Tinder and Bumble suck, right? First of all, in my POI, I already told you can get sex safely. COVID testing is expanding, especially in other countries that aren't the United States. Like, we believe that you can still get this testing. You also don't have a bad history with people that you're swiping right with on Tinder. And at best, this is largely marginal. We think that people can go a few months without having sex. It happens literally all the fucking time. Next, this idea that you're just bored and need someone to talk to. I'll take you later. People, first of all, should not use other people as a source of entertainment. That's probably principally a bad reason to like invite someone to live with you. But you also don't have to opt into a risk because there are other methods of entertainment. I'm flagging this for you now. I'm going to discuss it in the extension. Fourth response here. CG assumes that you act as a rational individual. Notice that this kind of nice OG who tells us that both people are in a place of intense and emotional instability because, again, they don't have the oxytocin they're looking for. Is either you buy that OG that you're going to end up romantically involved with this individual because we're all insane, or CG, you buy that they're rational, which means that you can likely find a better alternative anyway. 4 points of extension. First, you emotionally get fucked over. 2 likely outcomes. First, the partner turns it down. To respond to the DPM, this is exactly what you have to lose in sending the invitation. There's no guarantee that this person also thinks the relationship is worth it, especially given that they were also likely hurt by the breakup. We don't think that texting someone is as much of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge as CG thinks, especially if people act rationally as they contend and are just looking for someone to talk to who knows them well. Also, quarantine emotions as an individual are likely already all over the place. We're all kind of alone. We have no idea what's going on. So let's talk about what happens if you get rejected. First of all, there's a negative impact on your self-esteem. You're like, oh, fuck, someone rejected me. That never feels good. But it's amplified by the fact that it's not feeling good during a time where you're already emotionally unstable. And also, as a result, you have a likelihood of acting out. For example, a greater exposure to the virus, going out and drinking, things like that, irresponsible actions. Second likely outcome, the relationship goes bad. We believe this has been pretty well warranted by the opening opposition. You've been previously incompatible. You're probably going to be incompatible if you're literally spending every moment that you're awake with them. This only amplifies the time you have to detect problems. What happens if things go awry and they move out then? First, the marginal impacts that OO discusses, the practicalities of rent, space, and house, things like that. But the emotional impacts of already being in a vulnerable state and the losing a connection that you relied upon for a healthier mental state, i.e. this partner, is probably pretty bad. You were texting them again for a reason. You value their input. You value that relationship. It goes away if the relationship deteriorates again. Second extension, your relationship with your friends gets hurt. This is how we access the government's impacts about care, love, affection without damaging our self-esteem and our self-worth. There's first a few reasons why you lose friends in relationships. First, the friends who directed you away from an unhealthy relationship are probably going to be pissed off if you just go back to it anyway. It's like, why the fuck did I give you that much advice? You're just going to ignore it. Secondly, they probably consoled you during the breakup, spent a lot of emotional capital on you as an individual. They're likely claimed to support you in this action, but unlikely to invest the same degree in future crises because they don't think it's worth it. They think you're probably a hypocrite. This is potentially harmful because friends can serve as an incredible alternative to get this kind of intimacy platonically, therefore without harm, right? Maybe you're not fucking, but you still know this person, you still care about this person, and that's a mutual relationship, right? You both care about each other, you both know each other well. You still get access to that same amount of oxytocin conversationally, things like that. But also, roommates exist who aren't fucking, right? You can still invite a friend to live with you. We think you still get the same impacts. The only thing you lose is sex then. And we think that in this case, what CG tells us about friends with benefits existing is probably the perfect response to slot in here. Friends with benefits can exist, except in this case, you also don't have an awful romantic history that's likely to flare up and cause issues in this relationship. This is our response to CG. Turn their entire impact about friends with benefits. Third extension. In cases where this goes bad, you lose the relationship with this ex too, right? Likely, given that you're already talking again, there is some value in talking to this person. They know you well. They're able to address your problems. You have past histories, past shared experiences, memories that you enjoy together. However, there is a limit to your closeness that has been previously defined by the fact that you literally broke up at a certain point in your history, which means that there's likely some risk in getting back towards this bound again. When it goes bad, though, you have to start from square one, rebuilding, i.e. you have to go through the period where you're not talking to each other, things like that, before you start texting again, getting that emotional value back. But we also think it's pretty likely that they just give up and don't want to give it another try. They've been broken up with twice as an individual. I don't think you opt into that relationship a third time. I'll take a POI now.
Yeah, given that the comparative of this debate that we accepted at the beginning was the hoeing around using Tinder, and you said that that's an acceptable alternative because of COVID tests, but what about uninsured people or people that don't have health care that cannot receive these COVID tests? If this house is uninsured, should they just suffer under your comparative?
Okay, so first of all, again, it's never stated in case that they are uninsured. I don't think why I have to prove that to you as that burden. So, but also in those cases, maybe it's best that you just don't have sex with people for a bit so you don't get coronavirus and die. I think the same risk exhibits, even if you're fucking someone that you're going to live with, it's probably still bad. Here's our most important impact though. whether or not this relationship ends up working out for you as an individual, we believe that you get harmed as an individual because you lose the ability to develop yourself as a self-sufficient agent. The government sets forth the principle that in times of emotional need or you need like a fuck buddy, it's okay to allow someone who caused you emotional damage to come back into your life. This means that in future cases, you're potentially stuck with an unideal partner instead of finding one that is optimal or more stable because you just have this past history of like being okay with people who have caused you damage coming back into your life. We also believe, though, that this independence that you're getting is good and you don't need to find someone else. At this time, you have the unique ability to learn how to be alone because it's forced you to quarantine, which is especially important after a breakup. You can get new hobbies, you can find your own value, you can build new friendships, things that you uniquely have time to spend on when you're not spending them on a relationship. But notice that it gives you other pathways to be happy. This is specifically important because if you rely upon sexual relationships to be happy, you're more likely to hop into bed with anyone that seems remotely compatible, but this also makes you a healthier partner for future relationships. On government's idea that they get potential growth or personal growth through roughing it out with an ex in quarantine. We don't need that X for personal growth. You have friends, you have your own agency as an individual, but growth is also better when you're not dependent on an X who you are actually incompatible with to help that growth. This is the most important argument in the round and why CO takes, because it holds irrespective of the entire wash that the other three teams have been getting caught up in on the characterization of the relationship. I wish both government benches best of luck texting their exes. I know I sure won't be. Proud to oppose.
Thank you so much for the speech. And now I'd like to welcome to close of the Gov bench, the Gov Whip, here.
Just 1 second, I'm setting up my timer. Okay. 3, 2, 1, go. Our case here is that inviting your ex back has a lot of potential or even absolute benefits with little to no harms. First of all, opening opposition's biggest problem was with government focusing on sexual relations only. Our case explained all sides' not only emotional and second of all psychological impacts, which I will come to during my speech after some rebuttals. Opening opposition stated emotional harm, which we recognize can still be there, but worst case scenario is confirming your decision about your breakup, and if things don't go well, it is not like a relationship breakup. This is not a relationship. Yes, both sides will be more open to be vulnerable, but the bad emotional effects that come from that we believe balance out with the benefits we mentioned to you in our three scenarios. So based on cost and benefit here, both sides are equal, and I'll be a little biased here and say what we present weighs the balance down to our side, and I'll explain more on that later. Then opening opposition raises another point about finance. Just to engage with this, our house would not force their ex to pay rent. They can already afford all of the rent on their own, and they will pay for food and they will ask their ex to pay for food and water. We don't think the financial burden is a big issue here. We're sure that our house can agree with their ex about something that can work for both of them. Then comes closing opposition with inflated emotional impacts, and I will explain why. They focus on the side effects of rejection, but honestly how harmful it is to get rejected by your ex on text for asking them to move in with you. You already both rejected each other in the past. Another point closing opposition made is pissing off friends. They might get mad, but they also might get mad if you ever decide to get back to an ex with COVID or without. If your friends, we do not believe this will ruin the relationship or seriously harm it. We all faced rejection, and we've all had friends, and therefore we all realize how inflated their impacts are here. Then closing opposition comes in with their argument about facing personal growth and having to experience loneliness to know that you don't have to depend on someone for your emotional needs. This can happen, but what we are arguing here is that on our side of the house, this person has been lonely for 6 months. They experienced loneliness, and they can decide for themselves if they actually need to text their ex back and if they want this personal connection with another person. They are grown-up adults who can decide for themselves. So now moving on to my extension to my partner, the motion clearly states here that the compatibility comes from lifestyles and personalities, not from emotional or sexual compatibility. During quarantine, both those things almost have no effect on both people because both are environmentally affected issues. Your lifestyle and your exes are now both bound to staying at home. The biggest thing you'll both disagree on is to watch Netflix or play board games. Since the person reconnected with their ex, they're obviously missing emotional or sexual wants, and since their ex is willing to come and live with them, it is clear that their ex is missing the same things. As my partner told you, if it's an emotional need, both people are already know each other very well. They can easily talk about stuff and even catch up on life, providing them with the emotional human interaction they are looking for. Second of all, they become friends with benefits. We already know both people are sexually compatible, and if the ex agrees to come and live with the actor here, both sides are looking for the same thing. We do not see anything but benefit from our side of the house, where both sides are left happier and satisfied. Yes, you can use Bumble, but here we have guaranteed compatibility between the two. Third, best case scenario, if things go well, this relationship has a new shot, and under those circumstances, we argue that the relationship has a real chance. Through COVID, everyone realized how quickly and easily it is to change lifestyles. Extroverts had to get used to staying inside, for example. If both sides feel like maybe this is worth giving a shot again, we believe that it'll be much more easy on both sides to make lifestyle and personality changes, because both are now under a radical situation where their lifestyles were flipped upside down. So making some changes won't sound as big of a deal as it did. On the other hand, if they get back in a relationship and decide to break up, we don't believe it'll be as emotionally harmful, because it is a second breakup. You're not going into this expecting much in the first place, but second of all, you're expecting the problems that comes with that person, and you know what they'll present you with. Therefore, the breakup is way less likely to cause hurting or long-lasting heartbreak. Now, what are the harms of not doing this? Opposition told you the harms of doing it, which I rebutted and explained why the benefits outweigh the harms on our side. However, on our side, we do not speculate psychological harm. If this house does not text their ex, they will be lonely, especially if they count on outside stimulus every day, which is the majority of human beings. Your emotional and sexual needs will be in an all-time high during this quarantine, because you've never been quarantined before for this long. Hell, me as an introvert who do not really go out ever wanted to go out and talk to people during this quarantine. Emotional risk exists on both sides of the house. However, on our side, it is 100% happening, while on the other side, it might happen. But even if it happens, it is not as bad as the emotional impacts I just mentioned to you. Presenting you with all scenarios and weighing all possible outcomes, it becomes clear that the benefits that on our side of the house are way stronger and outweigh all of the harms that the opposition mentioned. But not only that, the harms that I just explained to you are way worse, but they are actually 100% happening if that person does not text their ex, and if that person rather keep their pride and fears rejection. So, presenting you with all of this, I am very proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for the last speech of today's debate, I'd like to welcome the UpWhip here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep.
Perfect. Give me a second, I'm grabbing a timer. Okay. Nikola, I would really appreciate if you could run the timer in the chat. Thank you so much.
Yep, will do.
Okay, before I get into my main clashes for the debate, I want to go on like two line by line rebuttals to the previous speech. Firstly, on the idea that like rejection on text is not as bad because the rejection has already happened. So like we've clearly like explicitly said that this is a particularly unstable situation in quarantine. You're emotionally vulnerable, and the fact that you're getting rejected twice, there's clearly a bit of a weighing issue here. And we just want to clarify that this rejection will still hold, and like saying it's not as bad is not helping that case here. But secondly, on the idea that like we've had 6 months to grow personally and then decide to send the text, so like personal growth is not really an important impact in the debate. Firstly, if you're going to text this person that you were incompatible with, you've clearly not had enough personal growth. But secondly, it's probably better for your relationship as a whole if you take time and rebuild that relationship slowly, as opposed to like having a few texts with them and then inviting them into your house. But then getting down to clash, right? So we see like 4 main clashes in this debate, 3 largely in the opening half, and then I'll deal with the 4th as the CG-CO clash. So what are these 4 clashes? Firstly, on the idea of intimacy. Secondly, on the idea of has our ex really changed? Thirdly, on the idea of the mischaracterization of what a split might look like. And lastly, on the potential for growth. So on the first about intimacy, what do we see, right? We see right out of OO that intimacy is like a foundation for the relationship, and that an ex's past relationship with you doesn't necessarily guarantee intimacy. We also say, or like they also say, that the lack of intimacy opens you up to emotional harm, right? And then we hear out of OG that it's like how the house is severely deprived of some like oxytocin or serotonin, etc., etc., and we need this intimacy from an ex. What we don't understand is why we need an ex to do this, right? Firstly, we don't think that this is like exclusively an ability of an ex to give to you. But secondly, we do agree that it's like an ex is not the best person to be giving you intimacy in a time in which you are emotionally unstable. I think Bob gives you good warranting for this in his extensions, but I will come back to it in our summary. But then secondly, on the idea of like whether or not our ex has changed, right? So we think that like the idea that there's no evidence the ex has changed is something that we see coming right out of opening op, and we think that they give good warranting for this. And the only like response we hear from this on through the gov bench is that like the quarantine has been likely to change them, etc., etc. There's like opportunities for personal growth, right? But we think that like COVID does not like change COVID does not necessarily change their behavior, and we don't see any concrete evidence of this. And additionally, we think that if someone treated you horribly under like normal circumstances or pre-COVID circumstances, it isn't likely that they're just going to suddenly get better under abnormal circumstances in which they're also probably emotionally unstable as well, right? Especially given their lack of social relationships, they're like unlikely to suddenly become a better person and like be a better boyfriend or whatever, or like girlfriend or like whatever partner in a relationship. But then we get the idea of like mischaracterization of the splitter, and this is important because both gov teams like seemingly seem to think that it's like very easy to go back to an alternative, and it's like, if the relationship doesn't work out, just move out, what the fuck. But then also on the other hand, we think that this is like a mischaracterization because the split, especially during COVID times, is far worse. One, we tell you that this like emotionally impacts both people first because you were relying on this relationship to give you some sort of solace during this unstable time. But secondly, simply the logistics of it and like moving somebody out of your house after you've created space for them are things that are going to take time, energy, and your mental health to focus on. And we think there will be impacts that like make this worse, right? But then we come down to the idea of potential for growth. And I want to treat this as a CG-CO clash primarily because the extension we get out of CG is that you don't have to date or have sex with someone if you live together, i.e. you can be like friends or friends with benefits. But what we get, like the first idea we get out of their case is that setting expectations hitherto for some reason eases conflict. So one, I'm not sure why they characterize like people in a relationship or like exes getting back together as perfectly rational human beings. It's like extremely idealistic. But as Boss points out, if you're all of a sudden rational and the only thing you're looking for is social connection, you're far more likely to rely on a friendship or find another source for this than like an ex who is toxic or not like compatible for you in the past. But secondly, we get an idea that like even if you do date, you get more insight into a person, and this for some reason like betters the relationship. So one, you had enough insight into the person to determine that they were incompatible with you, right? We don't see how this gets better under their side. But secondly, like I said, if there was already an incompatibility under normal conditions, we don't get any warranting from to why it would become even better, if not worse, in like unstable quarantine conditions. And then they come up with the idea it's like friends with benefits can exist. We don't get this point. We think you can have like friends with benefits without your ex too. And lastly, we get the idea that like breakups aren't bad if you don't like if you're not dating, but also we get this idea out of the gov whip that like you're not expecting much out of the relationship anyway, so the heartbreak will hurt less. We don't think this is necessarily true because you're clearly expecting some sort of solace for you to go back to an ex and compromise a certain amount of dignity. We think that any relationship breakup will hurt, and this characterization is false. But then, like, why we come down to CO and why we take this debate over the other teams, right? So I think like, largely over the debate, we focused on whether or not like this relationship will turn out well, and if it doesn't turn out well, it's like likely to hurt the person reaching out with an invite, right? But we think we sidestep all of this because we show you that like even if the relationship goes well, it is not worth the benefits that we get on that side. Why do we tell you this? 4 extensions. So on 3 extensions. On the first, we tell you that like emotional impacts hurt you when your partner may turn down your invite, and if the relationship goes bad, like you're already vulnerable, your dignity is hurt, your self-esteem is lowered. We don't think any of this helps in under quarantine conditions, right? But secondly, we tell you you're likely to lose the friendships or the relationship. Firstly, if the relationship goes sour, you're likely to lose this person that you clearly care about and are willing to rely on. But if the relationship goes well, you're likely to like lose friendships because people are likely to distance themselves from like a partner they saw as being toxic or abusive or like incompatible with you. And then thirdly, on the idea of like personal growth, right? We think that you're like far likely to stick with a healthier partner in the future if you learn to be alone with yourself, and that there's no better time than COVID to learn to do this. We think independence is good, especially after a breakup, because you learn to like achieve a certain amount of happiness on yourself. We think this is an extremely important impact because this holds respective of the relationship outcome, right? Whether or not the relationship goes well, you are far better on personal growth on opposition side than you are on government side, right? So because we've told you that like regardless of the clashes that exist in the debate, that we take this round because we get better benefits on both sides, the last question I'm going to come to is whether or not it's worth sending that invite, right? And we think, no, respect yourself, go hunt some better fish. Thank you.
Thank you all for this debate. As you know, it's final, so we're going to move into deliberation any minute now. And good luck to everybody. See you during announcements.
Good round, everyone.